All right, I think we are ready to get started. Looks like everyone can see my screen and can hear us. So on that note, thank you all for joining us today for how to write a cover letter. A couple of things we want to note as we're getting started. We will be recording this session and uploading it to YouTube following the live presentation. So you'll be able to view both the slides and hear the audio following this webinar. We'll also be sending it to you via email, so you'll have plenty of access to all the information. We've put together a great webinar for you today. We know that writing a resume and a cover letter can be a frustrating experience, but it certainly doesn't have to be. We at RecruitMilitary have been in the business of helping veterans find jobs for over 15 years, and we want to share our experience with you. We've been hosting job fairs for military veterans for 9 years, and in this time we've hosted over 650 of these hiring events. In our last webinar, we covered the do's and don'ts and best practices of how to write a resume, and today we'll cover the particulars of how to write an effective cover letter. My name is Liz Wheeler. I am the social media manager here at RecruitMilitary. Joining me today for this webinar is Mike Frankum, former Army captain and Senior Vice President of Marketing here at RecruitMilitary. Mike has worked in the field of veteran hiring for years and brings an incredible wealth of knowledge regarding how to make the most of your experience transitioning from the military to the civilian world, and in particular today, how to write a cover letter. At the end of this webinar, we will be hosting a live question and answer, so be sure to stick around for that. If you have any technical difficulties during this webinar, please let me know. Use the chat box attached to the toolbar on the right-hand side of the page, as you've been doing so far. If you have any other questions or comments during the course of the presentation, feel free to use that chat box as well. I'll try to answer the best I can throughout the webinar. On that note, we'll flip to the first slide and begin how to write a cover letter. Mike?
Thanks, Liz, and thank you everybody for joining us. Glad to have you with us today. And as we get started, as Liz mentioned, I've been working in this industry of recruiting, and specifically those with military experience and connecting them with employers nationwide since 1998. And so in that time, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of companies and a lot of individuals, and in that time, gain a lot of insight from both sides to understand how do you effectively go about in the different elements of a job search. And one of those topics that we sometimes get questions on that in some ways can be seen as almost an art that has been lost a little bit, and that's the writing of a cover letter. So to start with, though, we need to understand what is a cover letter. And real simple, it's a sales letter that is intended to spark interest in you. What you are trying to accomplish in a cover letter is to get a job interview. And that's the sole purpose that a cover letter has. So it's a letter that's intended to be a marketing piece, and its purpose is to get you a job interview. And in a cover letter, there are four main parts, and we've got a little acronym to follow with all of our common background as military veterans and the world of acronym. Not necessarily pretty as it comes to it, but when you think of cover letter, you want to GERK it. And what I mean by that is the first part is the G, grab attention. It's your introduction and an attempt to grab the attention of the reader in your opening. Secondly, you're going to talk about your experience and provide some brief examples of what that experience is and the relevancy to the company that you're applying to. And then you are going to do a little bit of research because you want to be able to demonstrate the knowledge that you've gained of the company that you have an interest in this job. And then you are going to close the letter and work to request an interview or conversation with that employer. So again, GERC, grab attention, highlight your experience, bring out that you've done some research and have interest in the company, and then close and ask for the interview. So Liz, if you go to the next slide, please. So when you think about your letter, you want to craft it strategically. And this means that you're not trying to pack your entire resume into this letter. You only want the letter itself to be about a half to 2/3 of a page long, because remember, it's meant to be attention grabbing and to highlight a couple of key points that are relevant to that company. Don't assume that the individuals reading the cover letter are going to understand your military experience. So don't use the MOSs that you may have. Don't use military jargon in this cover letter. Really bring out and address the points that the company is looking for through a position description that you read, or maybe it's a company that has just had an article written about them in the newspaper, and it said that they're going to be hiring for a variety of different roles, and you've tracked down one of the hiring managers, and so you're going to talk about how you would specifically fit the need in that particular position. And that's the third bullet there about making it unique to the job you're applying to. So don't have one cover letter and have that be the same exact letter that you send out every single time for every position. Make sure you tailor it. You can have a general template that includes some of the basic components of it, but make sure you tweak and tailor that cover letter and each of the 4 parts specifically to that employer and the job that you're applying to. Something that can sometimes be difficult, and that is to get a name, and that's really any name to address it to, because you want this to get to an individual. And if you're not able to get a name to address the envelope to, because most of the time when you're sending a cover letter, you're really going to do this in print fashion a lot of times. So this is even going to make you stand out in a lot of ways, because not a lot of people are going to take the time to research and figure out who should they address a cover letter to within a company. But you can figure out most of this really through a little bit of research on the internet, and it will really make you stand out. And if you do elect to email it, it also allows you to specifically find an individual's email address. Again, through some research and ingenuity, you're already making yourself stand out a little bit in the eyes of a lot of employers when you think about this. And if you can't find a specific name, then you can take the approach of Dear Hiring Manager, or you could go to Whom It May Concern. But again, if you think about you're trying to tailor a message to a specific role or a specific company, it's always going to come across a little bit stronger for you if you are able to figure out who to address that, that cover letter to. And if there's a specific name on a job posting, for example, you'll oftentimes see that the company will include a name of a recruiter that might be leading the recruiting effort for a particular job. You could include that name and do the research to figure out where that person is. Again, this isn't necessarily going to be an easy process, because you do have to take some time and you do have to research it, but it can really make you stand out. In your writing, one of the things you want to make sure that you do is to display enthusiasm and excitement in your writing. You want to be able to help that reader understand, build excitement in them on, first off, who you are as an individual, and then how you see yourself being able to help them carry their business or their organization forward. Liz, if you go to the next slide, please.
Sure, and I just want to jump in on that last point really quick and mention that displaying enthusiasm or showing excitement does not generally mean using exclamation points in your writing. It means conveying rhetorically your passion for what the company does and how it would fit into their job. You still want to maintain a professional voice in your writing while simultaneously displaying that excitement.
Yeah, great point, Liz. you know, with the electronic world that we live in, a lot of us have gotten used to, in text messages and email, using exclamation points and emoticons and those types of things to really express our passion or energy. And that's not what we're talking about in a cover letter. It really is a professional representation that you're really trying to make. So great point on that and bringing that out, Liz. All right, let's talk about a hypothetical situation for our transitioning or our veteran, Jonathan. Jonathan has served in the Army for 8 years. While he was in the Army, he was a 13 Echo, which is a fire direction specialist. So this is an individual who helped compute the data that ensured that the artillery rounds impacted where they were intending to impact. So very attention to detail oriented type of job, and one that requires a lot of thinking on your feet and being able to analyze things and understand how data affects each other in a certain scenario. He transitioned out of the military 2 years ago, and he has worked as a data administrator during those 2 years. And while he was in the service, he actually completed his associate's degree, and while he's been working the last 2 years, he's actually been working on finishing his bachelor's degree in business. And his desire that he's really interested in is he wants to break into the marketing field. That's where his interests currently lie. So that sets the tone. And what we want to do, and Liz, if you go to the next slide, in thinking about how we would translate that to a cover letter is, again, we want to remember the 4 parts. So remember, the G is to introduce the self, but grab attention. You're trying to grab the attention of the reader. Then you're going to bring out some of your experience with the E. So provide a couple of brief examples of your experience. And then in the R, you want to apply your experience to the actual position. And that's going to show your research. That's what the R stands for in the acronym, is the research you've done to understand what it is that the company's looking for, and then applying your experience to that. And then finally, the close, or the C, and request of an interview. So let's take a look at an example in how you might build out this cover letter using this acronym to help guide you along. So notice that we actually address this to Dear Mr. Nelson. So we took the time to address the letter to an individual within that organization. And then we begin and remember, what we're trying to do is grab attention and introduce ourselves in the opening. Having led a small team of technical specialists in the Army and serving as a data administrator for the last 2 years with Acme Company, I'm writing to express my interest in the marketing specialist role with ABC Company. In the attached resume, you'll see I've excelled as a team leader, am extremely adaptable, and possess data skills that lead to positive results and will facilitate quick contributions to your marketing team. So what I've done there is I've quickly introduced myself. I've told them that I'm interested in their marketing specialist role, and it is important to specifically mention what the role is that you're highlighting, because many organizations will have multiple positions open at the same time, so you want to make sure that you include that. And then in that last sentence, what you're really doing is you're referencing your resume, but remember, we said we don't want to rehash everything in the resume, so you're referencing it, and then we're going to bring out in the next step, and Liz, if you'll move to the next slide, that experience of a couple of things that we've done that are relevant to this marketing position that the company has open. So in the E, we want to provide the brief examples of the experience. In the Army, I developed skills not only in detailed data management and team leadership, but in effectively operating in a high-stress, ever-changing environment. I'm confident those skills would enable me to excel in the position of marketing specialist and help the company achieve its aggressive growth goals. While at Acme Company, I led a project team of 3 people to reconfigure data management and reduce costs in the department by 12%. Additionally, I pursued my bachelor's degree in business and am slated to graduate in May. In school, I have developed a great interest in using my attention to detail and analytical ability in a marketing position where analysis is a part of the role like described in your position. So if you'll notice there, what in this case we did is because he had both Army experience or military experience and some experience on the outside, is we brought in an example from both of those professional experiences that Jonathan has had. And so it highlighted in the Army his ability to operate in high stress, rapidly changing environments, and that he understands how to manage data and people as a member of the Fire Direction Center. Then in Acme Company, we highlight again his leadership, but notice that it talked about the reduced costs in the department by 12%. Anytime you can get specific like that, you're going to come out ahead, and you're providing the detail that sort of creates the curiosity on the part of the reader to learn more about what it is that you did in those specific roles. And then he also talks about where his interest lies in the position and ties it to that experience that they're looking for in their position description. So that's laying out your experience in a brief way. So Liz, if you can go now to the next slide where we talk about the research that we've done and specifically applying that experience to the position. And so you're going to want to reference how you've come to learn about this company a little bit. And you might do 10, 15 minutes of research on the internet to learn what the company might have as far as growth plans. Maybe there's been an article written about them because they're increasing their department sizes for very specific initiatives. Whatever it might be, you want to find those nuggets and then tie your experience to what they're trying to accomplish. So after researching ABC Company, I understand that you've entered 6 new markets in the last 12 months and have plans to enter 10 more in the next 18 months. My proven ability to operate under pressure and develop plans based on sound data, combined with passion I've developed for marketing while operating a growing blog, provides an exciting potential match for your marketing team. Now notice here how we took the approach of getting very specific, kind of some research that we did on the company and what's going on in the organization. Then he talked about how his proven ability and the skills that he has tie into what they're going to need in that growth plan. And then he also brought in some things and interests that he has on the side that would have sparked. And in this case, because he doesn't have in his background specific marketing experience, if he's applying for a marketing role, they may be trying to find that link to the marketing world. And this is a way, in this particular case, he was able to bring that experience into the role, even though he hasn't formally held, according to our background, that marketing role. So it's a way to bring in some other experiences. And you might have other experiences, perhaps from volunteer work you've done and things like that. And that's where you can bring those things in of value to what you're trying to lay out for the organization and them understanding and gaining excitement in who you are. Liz, if you can go to the final part of putting this together then, and that's to request the interview or close the letter. So this is very simple. It's going to just very simply state, I look forward to discussing with you how I can benefit your organization. Please contact me to arrange a time to speak. Sincerely, Jonathan Williams. It doesn't have to be much more than that. It really is what in sales is knowing closing the sale, and it's really, in this case, the close or what you're asking the person to purchase is to purchase essentially time with you to learn more about you. And it's very important that you just ask for what it is that you want from the reader. And then in putting it all together, you can see on the next slide that you've got probably about a half page to 2/3 of a page letter that will supplement your resume and create interest on the behalf of the reader. So Liz, with that, I will turn it to you.
Okay, and we've gotten a lot of questions so far about whether this presentation will be available following our live airing, and the answer to that is yes. We encourage you to use our hypothetical Jonathan's cover letter as a template for your own cover letter. So these slides will be available. We will email you the recording tomorrow, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find the link to that either directly from our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/RecruitMilitary, or on any of our other social networks. On that note, it's really important to remember as you do write your own cover letter to use active verbs such as I led, I carried out, or I managed. Something that hiring managers are looking for is accomplishments, things that you have done in previous roles and responsibilities that you have been in charge of. Using those active verbs demonstrates in a very simple and effective way that you have, in fact, had the experience that they're looking for. Another point to remember is cover letters are very specific. They're not industry directed like resumes can be sometimes. For example, when you're writing a resume and you're looking for a specific industry, you can use the same copy of the resume for multiple applications. This is not the case with cover letters. Cover letters need to be specific to the job to which you are applying. So because that can be a larger chore than simply creating one resume, it's good practice to write cover letters only for positions of great interest. This is also a question we've got throughout the interview, or throughout the presentation, is when is it a good idea to write a cover letter? And I think that this bullet point answers that. And you should write a cover letter for positions of great importance or positions that you're particularly interested in, and you can invest that time in creating that specific cover letter. We also want to note on this page, if you're not sure how to translate your military experience into civilian job skills, we have another webinar dedicated entirely to that topic titled How to Translate Your Military Skills into Civilian Language. You can find that on our YouTube page or at the URL on this screen. We also, our resume writing webinar, we've received questions about that throughout this presentation. You can find that likewise on our YouTube channel or at a URL which I will chat to the group in just a moment. Before we move on to the question and answer, we want to just check. Okay, we can move on to the question. Before we move on to the question and answer, we do want to cover those topics. So if you have any other questions regarding the material, please let us know now. And you can also go ahead and start submitting your questions. Just use the chat box on the right-hand side of the page. Expand that orange arrow, the same toolbar that you've been using, and go ahead and ask us anything. We'll be covering these for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, this is a great question from Jim. He said, can you give me some examples of how to find the hiring manager's name and contact information for different types of companies? Mike, do you want to cover that one?
Sure. Jim, there's many ways to begin that process. A primary one for you would potentially be LinkedIn, and utilizing LinkedIn, where you can conduct a search by company first, and then that'll oftentimes return a number of people that are on LinkedIn that are with that company. Now, if it's a very large company that is global in nature, that can sometimes prove challenging. But once you actually do your search on LinkedIn for a company, you can further filter by location to help narrow that perhaps to the location where that individual is. And if you are, so that's one way is really via LinkedIn, and looking for specific job titles that they are holding. So if you're applying for a job in, let's say, quality management in their manufacturing, then I'd recommend seeking out and looking for folks who have manufacturing supervisor or operations manager or something along those lines in their job title with that particular company. Another way for smaller or medium-sized businesses that might be in your local area, and by the way, using a cover letter with a resume to small and medium-sized businesses that you learn about in your local area can be a great way to introduce yourself to those organizations. And what you might do is most companies have some sort of receptionist. Would be to literally just call the organization and ask for the name of the individual who leads, let's say it's marketing because it's a marketing role, or the individual who leads the manufacturing operation at their facility, or maybe it's the distribution manager. So you could give a call and likely get a receptionist and just ask for the name, and that's simply all you're asking for. Some may then not give it to you, and in that case, you can turn to just doing a search in general in Google and put in the company name and maybe the area of the meaning the work area, like distribution or manufacturing or marketing, and the company name. So for instance, if you were looking up RecruitMilitary and wanting to know who was involved in marketing, you might put into Google RecruitMilitary marketing, and you may return with my name or others who have been involved in marketing at RecruitMilitary. So it's a way then that you can just begin to sift through, and also probably get some potential returns from articles that they may have written, or maybe they've been interviewed, or things of that sort. So those are different techniques that you can use to find someone and do some research.
Travis asks, is it okay to mention in a cover letter that the Army will pay relocation expenses or to talk about military perks?
Travis, I don't know that I would have that really be something that I would lead with or make as a very prominent thing. However, let's say that your scenario is you're making the transition and you're currently at Fort Riley, Kansas, and you want to be closer to home, which is out in North Carolina. So you're applying direct to companies that are out in North Carolina. It may be appropriate in that cover letter to, in the close, maybe state something that relates to, though my mailing address currently is Fort Riley, Kansas, my plans are to return home, or to return closer to home, where I am from North Carolina and have great interest to returning to the state. And I want you to know, or it may benefit you to understand that the military will be providing the relocation for me and my family to do that. So you can take that type of approach, and I would say that that would be a scenario where you would potentially include that in your cover letter if it were relevant, that you were applying to positions that were quite a distance from where you're currently physically located.
Ed asks, do you recommend sending the contents of a cover letter to the hiring authority once you find out that your application was referred to the hiring manager? For example, in the event that there is a huge pool of applicants and the chances of your resume and cover letter being slim, is this beneficial?
Ed, I'm not fully sure on the question, but I'll go with a scenario here of what I think you're referencing is there have been a lot of applicants for a particular job, and perhaps this was online, and you got some sort of feedback that you were referred to the hiring manager. If you have the capability to know who that hiring manager is and the name of that hiring manager and an ability to get that message to them, whether it be through mail or email because you have the email address of the individual, then certainly taking a proactive approach that acknowledges that you have received word that they're in receipt of your resume, and as they review that, you wanted to be sure to bring out a few key points that you believe make you a unique candidate for them to seriously consider for the role, and then bulletize a few things in that, and then close with, I look forward to hearing from you in the very near future, and scheduling that phone conversation would be a tactic that you could potentially use, again, to be proactive in reaching out if you receive that information.
Troy, in answer to your question, Troy asked, can you show the example cover letter again? We will be emailing this presentation to you following this webinar, so you will have access to seeing the example cover letter again. So that should not be a problem. Glenn asks, are cover letters preferred in hard copy or electronic version?
Really, I'd say that that's really going to be dependent on the type of role that it is. I will say that it's rare to receive a hard copy of things in today's world. So if you have the information where you receive both, and you're able to figure out both an email and a mailing address, you might even take the approach of sending it both electronically and in the mailed version. And if you do it electronically, you may just reference that you've also forwarded this via mail, so they can look forward to receiving a hard copy of your cover letter and resume as well. In today's world, it's oftentimes acceptable to receive things electronically and via email. Just a reality that you ought to really know, though, is that when it comes to recruiters and hiring managers, their inbox is extremely full. On an average day, I personally receive hundreds of email in my inbox, and I'm not alone in that. And so it's very easy, and you don't try to. You never, as a recruiter or someone who's trying to fill a position, you never try to have a email get lost in your inbox because you might be missing the right person. But the reality is it could get lost in the shuffle. So that's why I suggest if you have the ability to figure out both the email and the print, you can go that route. If I'm going to take the time to send a cover letter, I'm generally going to take the time to send it probably via mail and figure that out, because I know not many people will take the time to do that. And again, I'm trying to stand out from the general populace and make myself be seen as a candidate that is a cut above the others. And so taking that step to do both would be really what I would do if I really had a great interest in the role.
Travis asks, should the cover letter be sent with the resume as one document, or should they be separate?
And in this one, I assume you're talking, Travis is asking about electronically. And I would really send it as two attachments. And the reason for that is that if you capture the attention of the reader, they will potentially feed your resume into their applicant tracking system, which is their electronic tool to track applicants. And if you have a cover letter before you have your resume, it likely won't pull into their applicant tracking system cleanly. And that then will be a bit of a hassle for that recruiter that might be using their applicant tracking system. So I would suggest that in the electronic form to have the two attachments, one being your cover letter and one being your resume.
Dave asks, should one ever ask in a cover letter, quote, based on my resume, is there any other position that you would recommend I consider that you currently need to fill?
You know, I really would not advise taking quite that approach because remember, a cover letter, one of the things we talked about was that you did the research. That's an important part to remember about the cover letter is that you've done a bit of research to make your letter and resume unique and specific to the needs of that particular company. And if you take that approach, then you're kind of taking away from that uniqueness. Now, if how you might phrase that and show an openness to other ideas or thoughts would be to, in your closing, mention your admiration for them as a company, and if they, as the evaluator, believe that there may be other positions not publicly available that may be a good fit, because of your admiration and excitement for the company, you would welcome an opportunity to speak with them about those positions as well. So I'd take more that, a little bit of an approach, twist to the approach, rather than being more general and sort of saying, because remember, the research and specifically tailoring the cover letter to the position is an important part of the process, and you don't want to defeat that by just throwing out that general statement.
And that is going to wrap up our question and answer session for today. We thank you all for joining us for How to Write a Cover Letter. Be sure to visit our website at www.recruitmilitary.com. We have a lot of other job-seeking resources for you there. We also host job fairs all over the country in most major cities. You can find a job fair specifically for military veterans in a city near you at events.recruitmilitary.com. As always, if you have any questions or comments about this presentation, please feel free to email us. Our email can be found on the registration email. We look forward to seeing you the next time, and we appreciate your attending. Thank you.